All right, we're going to go ahead and jump in. Thank you, everybody, for logging on this morning and attending the seminar. Appreciate you all. We're going to go from 10 to a little bit around 11:30, maybe a little bit before, and just kind of walk through some of the basics about the ACT. This will be a little bit, there's a lot of, when we talk about preparing for the ACT, there's a lot of content for math and English section that you really need to know. The reading and science are more strategy driven. So you'll note that we're going to be covering we're going to be covering time wise those areas more heavily. But that's just because there's a lot of content, whereas the reading and the science, it's more strategy driven. So first, I want to talk about why should we prepare for the ACT, or why should you think about preparing for the ACT? So I want to tell you a little story about a student that we came to us a while back, and he took his first practice test and he got a 19, and he just kind of was like, I don't know if college is right for him. He just didn't know if college was right for him and wasn't sure what he was going to do. And he worked really, really hard, and he ended up getting a 26 on his ACT. So he got into several different schools, and he even got thousands of dollars. He got over $10,000 every year of college scholarship money. So he got $40,000 worth. So let's just say he put in 40 hours of work, which is, he probably only did half of that, but let's just say he put in 40 hours of work and he got $40,000 in terms of scholarship money for that. So really every hour that he put in, he basically paid himself $1,000. And that's really not all that unusual. There's really a lot at stake in terms of college admissions and in terms of college scholarships. A lot of scholarships now are determined just based on what that ACT score is. So a lot of reason to consider preparing for the ACT and really trying to do as best as you can. So how can you do really well on the ACT? Well, just like anything in life, the more you practice, the better you do. And ACT is no different in that regard. So what we found in doing this for, almost 20 years now, is the number one factor, whether a student improves or doesn't improve on the ACT, is whether that student does practice tests and then reviews why he or she missed what was missed. So for most students, we find that around 5 full-length practice tests, once they've worked through about 5 full-length practice tests, then they're in a place where they have reached, pretty close, if not right around their peak. Kind of after 5 full-length practice tests, you get to the point of diminishing returns, where it just takes a lot of work to make very tiny gains. So however you practice, there's a lot of things you can do. You can self-study. A lot of people use that option. I sent everybody here a practice test, so you can use that practice test as a start. This ACT, that guide right there, the book that you see on the screen, that is a great book. It's got several ACT practice tests on it. It has all the answers explained, so you can take that test and then you can go back and be like, okay, I missed this one, and it'll tell you it's not G because of this and that, and it is H because of this and that. So it'll kind of help you understand why it is what it is. Other things that you can do to prepare are take classes. A lot of times there are classes for the ACT. We have one that we're giving you guys a kind of a special promo for today and tomorrow. We're discounting 40% off for anybody that wants to take a class. It'll be a similar format to this, only this is a much bigger group, and this is not going to be very interactive, as interactive at least, because it's more of me just kind of presenting information to you all. But classes certainly are a great aid. And of course, one-on-one tutoring can really help out. So lots of different ways to prepare for the ACT. So let's talk about what's on the ACT. There are 4 sections, as we alluded to earlier. There's the English section. The English section is looking at a lot of grammar. It's kind of like you have a paper and you need to go through and edit that paper. The math section deals with a lot of Algebra 1 and geometry. Yeah, there are a few questions that are more advanced than that, but the vast majority of questions are algebra 1 and geometry. If you know those things well, then you can do really well on the math section. And even the students that are taking, pre-calculus and calculus right now, even those students can do can really benefit from going back to some of that earlier math. They're like, okay, wait, I forgot what the circumference formula is. I learned that in whatever grade, maybe back in middle school or something. So a lot of things there is just like, okay, you have some familiarity with it. We just need to kind of go back and hone some of those skills. Then there's a reading section. The reading section has 4 passages and 10 questions. It will probably be the most boring thing you've read in your life. Really no exaggeration there. Many of the passages are very, very dry. And I think they do that on purpose to see, can you really pay attention even when it's something that's maybe not super interesting to you? Then finally, there's a science section. Now, a lot of people are scared off by the science section. They're like, well, I'm not very good at chemistry. How is this going to be? And it really has very, very, very little to do with chemistry or biology or physics. It has everything to do with reading a chart and graph and finding trends from experiments. So very different than what you would see in a science class. And we'll talk about some strategies to be effective with that. All right, there is an essay, and the essay is optional. Every school will say, yes, we require the essay, or no, we don't require the essay. So you just want to kind of be aware of, your school, the schools that you're applying to, do they require the essay? Do they not? We're not going to talk about the essay here. A lot of schools don't require it, but there are some that do. So just be mindful of that. All right, so we're going to jump in and talk about the English section. For the English section, you get 45 minutes to answer 75 questions. For most people, while that seems like a lot of questions in that time, for the vast majority of people, time is really not too big of an issue. Maybe they're rushing in a little bit at the end, but on the whole, most people can do okay on this. So we're not going to talk about time management techniques necessarily for the English, but we will talk about some general principles as far as time is concerned on some of the other sections. So let's talk about some of the things that are in the English section. So there are 5 types of punctuation questions, and these punctuation questions make up 30% of the questions that you'll see. So on that, there's going to be 3 different comma rules you need to know. So if you know these 3 rules, you can do really well on this. Only 3 comma rules. If you get these 3 comma rules, you don't have to worry about any other ones. These are the ones that they test time and time again. Then you also need to know how the semicolon rule works and how the colon rule works. And I should say one thing I mentioned earlier, but for those of you who have just logged on, if you do have questions along the way, feel free to throw those in the chat. I'm happy to take a look at those as I can and make sure we go through that. So let's talk about what these 3 comma rules, the semicolon and the colon rule, what are those about? All right, so for the first comma rule, this is when you combine 2 complete sentences. Now, first of all, what's a complete sentence? So most people think a complete sentence has a subject and a verb, and that's true, but it also has to be a complete thought, okay? For example, a complete sentence would not be this: because it's so cold outside. Now that has a subject and it has a verb, but it's not a complete thought. So when we talk about a complete sentence, we need a subject, we need a verb, but we also need to have a complete thought. It needs to be able to stand alone with nothing else. So a lot of times on the ACT, they're going to look at combining 2 complete sentences. When we combine 2 complete sentences, we can do that with a conjunction and a comma, okay? We put the comma before that conjunction. Now, what the heck is a conjunction, you might be asking yourself? Great question. Conjunctions are fanboys: for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. So let's take a look at an example. So here we have Katie likes Chick-fil-A. Then we have and she enjoys Dewey's Pizza. Notice I have a complete sentence here. Then I have a complete sentence on this other side. And then I have this conjunction. Remember, conjunctions are for, and, nor, but, or, yet, so. And because they're both complete sentences, I put the comma here. Now, if one of these was not a complete sentence, I would not put this comma here. So we only put the comma with the conjunction if both sides are complete sentences. If one side is not a complete sentence, let's just say the right side over here said just enjoys Dewey's Pizza and it didn't have the subject she, I would not put a comma there. Okay, but as it is, both sides right here are complete sentences. So with the conjunction, I need the comma. Okay, and again, like I said before, if you have questions as we're moving along, feel free to throw them in the chat, even if we've kind of moved on. Happy to go back and answer anything. Okay. All right, so that's comma rule number one. Let's talk about comma rule number two. So if you're taking notes, which I would highly encourage, these are some words that you should write down. Because, although, since, if, while. If you start a sentence with one of those words, you're going to need a comma after that introductory clause. Okay. Again, just when we start a sentence with one of those words, do we need a comma after that? For example, while Kelsey was waiting for her student, then I need the comma after that introductory clause, because this is what we call it dependent clause. It can't stand on its own. So we just say she ate pizza. Okay. Where can I find a link to this presentation? I'm going to send out of the recording later today of this. All right, so this is how our second comma rule works, where we just start with like, because it's so cold outside, comma, I am staying inside. Anytime that we have that introductory dependent clause, we want to put a comma after it. Somebody asked if I could repeat the words. Sure. So words like because, although, since, while, if. Those are kind of some of the main ones. There are other ones, but those are the biggies. When you start a sentence with one of those, make sure you put a comma after that introductory clause. Okay. All right, let's go ahead and move on to our next one. This is probably the most important comma rule. This is the interrupter rule. And like I said, of all the comma rules, there's only those three, right? So all we got to memorize is just these three comma rules. But this one is probably the most important one. So for this rule, and there's a lot of nuances here, so pay real close attention. When we have one word or a phrase, a short phrase, that interrupts the flow of the sentence, it kind of just like is like, whoa, we're talking about something else now, and then we get back to it. So it interrupts the flow of the sentence. It can appear at the very beginning, at the middle, or at the end of the sentence. We need to put commas around it, or we can put dashes around it, or we can even put parentheses around it. So any of those work. Okay, let me give you an example. So here I have Michael Jordan, the best basketball player in history, is coming over for dinner. Notice that in this case, I could pull out this clause, best basketball player in history, and I would be left with Michael Jordan is coming over for dinner. So this clause just kind of interrupts the flow. And the key is, and again, this is a key, if I took this clause out, it would still be a complete sentence. It would still flow fine. If that's the case, if you can pull it out, you need commas, or you could put dashes around it, or you could put parentheses around it, okay? And again, this can happen at the beginning of a sentence, in the middle, like this, or at the end of a sentence, okay? So that's how comma rule number 3 works. All right, next one we're going to talk about is the semicolon rule. Now, we've already talked about complete sentences. We've said complete sentences have a subject and a verb, and they've got to be a complete thought. So for the semicolon, we really are just using a semicolon like a period. If you see a semicolon as an answer possibility, you need to check, do I have a complete sentence before? Do I have a complete sentence afterwards? If you have a complete sentence both before and after, then yes, you can use the semicolon here, okay? It's as simple as that. If you could put a period there, you could put a semicolon there. All right, here's an example. Mitchell likes the beach, that's a complete sentence. He plays sports there, that's a complete sentence. So I could put a semicolon here. Yes, I could also put a period there. Yes, I could also put a comma with a conjunction there. Any of those would be acceptable, and they wouldn't make you differentiate between those because they're all grammatically correct. So that's how the semicolon rule works. Again, semicolon, just look, do I have a complete sentence before? Do I have it afterwards? Okay. All right. Last punctuation rule is our colon rule. If you see a colon, these two dots, what you want to do is you always want to make sure, do I have a complete sentence before? That's your big thing. Everybody's always like, well, list, list, list. No, 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 no. If you see a colon, you need to have a complete sentence before the colon. After the colon, yes, you could have a list. You could have one word. You could have a phrase. You could have another complete sentence. You can have almost anything afterwards. All right. Here's an example. Matt speaks Spanish fluently, colon. He speaks all Spanish to his 3 kids. All right. So here I've got a colon. So when I see the colon, what do I need to test? Do I have a complete sentence beforehand? In this case, I do. So it's great. All right. All right. So those are our 5 kind of, main types of comma, semicolon, colon questions, right? The 3 comma rules, the semicolon, and the colon. If you have questions about any of those, feel free to throw in the chat. We're going to move on to agreement, but again, I'm happy to go back if somebody's got a quick question they want to get some clarification on. I know I am moving through this really quickly, and I apologize that I've got to move through this quickly. We just kind of have a limited time. So I just want to give you as much information as I can. Like I said, I will send out this recording so you can have this and look back at it again. And you've got the study sheets that have more examples for you as well. So, all right, let's take a look at the 5 types of agreement questions that you're going to see. So you're going to see subject verb agreement. How should we conjugate that verb? Pronoun antecedent agreement, misplaced modifiers, parallel construction, and apostrophes. All right, these types of questions make up 25% of the English section of the ACT. So subject verb agreement, let's talk about what that looks like. All right, so I'm going to have you be a little interactive here. See if you guys are awake. And what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to put in what is the subject of this sentence for that example number 1. What's the subject? And then what should the verb be? Okay, what's the subject of that sentence? And then what should the verb be? So go ahead and throw in the chat. It'll just go to me, so you don't have to worry about, so in the chat, just throw in what's the subject of this sentence, and then what do you think the verb should be? And if you don't know, that's okay. You can just put a question mark in there, and we'll take a look at this. Again, what's the subject of example 1, and what is the verb? You guys, a couple more seconds here. All right, so we're going to jump in here. So when we think about subject verb agreement, you'll see these questions when a verb is underlined. Okay, if all the answers are verbs, it's the same verb and it's just kind of conjugated differently, probably subject verb agreement. So how do we answer subject verb agreement type questions? All right, notice what I'm saying here. We want to get rid of prepositional phrases and interrupters to find the true subject. So if there was an interrupter like around commas or around dashes or parentheses, we would get rid of that. Or if there's a prepositional phrase. Now here, there is one. Of students is a prepositional phrase. So we got to get rid of that. Prepositional phrases, for those of you who don't know, a lot of people think about them as something the house, on the house, in the house, around the house, by the house, through the house. For ACT, the most commonly used prepositional phrases are of something. If you have a phrase that starts with the word of, ends with a noun, that's a prepositional phrase. So we get rid of students. Of students cannot be a part of the subject. So students is not part of the subject. Sorry for those of you who said that. It is not. The of students describes the true subject, which is the group. And then we would say the group, singular, is going to the party. Okay, because it's just one group. So the group is going to the party. So that's how we answer subject verb agreement questions. You know, we really want to get rid of those prepositional phrases or those interrupters, find the true subject, and move along from there. All right, this is pronoun antecedent agreement. So go ahead and take a look at this in the chat here. What I'd like you to do is I'd like you to say, should this be it or them? And then what is this referring to? What is the it or them referring to? Okay, and you can use the same logic that we just used for subject verb agreement. So again, throw that in the chat here. Should this be it or them? And what is the it or them referring to? Go ahead and throw that in the chat. I'll give you a second. You can use that same logic with getting rid of any prepositional phrases, and we'll take a look. All right. Give you guys another 5 seconds. So in this case, we have a prepositional phrase of beans. We want to get rid of that. The dent is on the can. The dent's not on the beans. The of beans describes what type of can. So the can, and we just have one can because it's the can, has a dent on it. It's singular, so it's got to be it. Okay? So that's pronoun antecedent agreement. All right, misplaced modifiers. These are kind of interesting. So I want you to take a look at example 1 here. And I want you to tell me, what is gross and slimy? In example 1, again, throw in the chat. What do you think is gross and slimy according to example 1? In example 1, what am I saying is gross and slimy? Okay, again, throw that in the chat. In example 1, what am I saying is gross and slimy? All right. All right. So in this case, we have a modifying phrase, gross and slimy, and that is right next to, it always has to be right next to the thing it's modifying. So in example 1, I am saying I am gross and slimy, because gross and slimy is a modifying phrase and it's butted up next to the noun I. But in example 2, we have gross and slimy is butted up next to the remote. So in example 2, the remote is gross and slimy. So sometimes the author will want one thing or another, and you need to be able to see, like, okay, when we have a modifying phrase, it always has to be butted up next to the thing that is trying to describe. So if earlier in the passage I was saying this remote is all nasty and I just took a shower, then I would say gross and slimy. I would need 2. I would need the second one, not the first one, because I'm not saying that I am gross and slimy. But in example 1, it's saying I am gross and slimy. So that's how those misplaced modifiers work. It looked like there were a couple questions also in the chat. If you have questions, if you would do me a favor and not throw those in the chat while I'm getting like 50 or 60 people responding to different things, because I might miss them. So if I missed some of that, feel free to throw that in the chat again, and try to do it in a time where I'm not saying, hey, throw something in the chat, just so that I catch them, because we've already got like 150 things and I'm trying to present at the same time. So if you're able to do that, that'd be great. Somebody had asked about how can you get extended time on the ACT. I did see that question. It's a great question. To get extended time, it's gotten a lot more difficult these days, but it's still possible. And typically the people that are able to get extended time are those that have a long documented trail of needing extra time on tests. So if you can document that not just right now, not just, oh, it happens to be right during my junior year. That's so convenient. They don't like that. Okay. They want to see that over many years, you have needed extra time on tests. Then you're more likely to get the extra time. You can do that through ACT. You can apply there. You can also apply with your college counselor at school. They can kind of help you through that process as well. It is kind of a complicated process and long, but it can be really, really worth it for students that need certain accommodations. So, and if I missed any other questions in the chat, please feel free to throw those back in so that I don't miss that. Great questions. All right, parallel construction, you always want to have parallel construction. So in this case, notice Mitchell enjoys playing sports, eating fancy dinner, and going to the movies. You know, like an option that they might have given was like, Mitchell enjoys playing sports, eating fancy movies, and to go to the movies. Well, that wouldn't work because we wouldn't have that parallel construction. You know, all these phrases, anytime we have a list of two or more things, we've got to have that same type of construction. So this is playing sports, eating fancy dinners, going to the movies. All right. All right. Apostrophes. So with apostrophes, this is our last type of agreement. There's lots of things to know. So we're going to roll through these. You should know these different ITSs, ITS, IT apostrophe S, and ITS apostrophe. So I want you to think right now in your head, I'm not going to have you throw this in the chat, but I want you to just think, when would I use that first one? When would I use that second one? And when would I use that third one? I just want you to take a minute and think, can you come up with a sentence where you would use each of those? Okay. And what's the rule? When do I use each of those? So take just 20 seconds and think about this. All right, so let's talk about what each of these are. ITS without an apostrophe, I know it's kind of backwards, but this is possession, okay? IT apostrophe S is it's the contraction. And ITS apostrophe, hopefully you're like, I don't know when I would use that. Well, that would be good if you thought that to yourself, because this is not a word. We should never use ITS apostrophe. Or sometimes they'll put ITS apostrophe S, not a word either. Okay, so let's take a look at an example. It's a beautiful day. This works because you could say it is a beautiful day, and that's what IT apostrophe S is. Its paws hurt. This is showing possession. Here's where you would say it's, but you can't really say it is paws hurt, right? So we're showing possession. All right, we should also know the different theirs. So there's there where it's they are, there where it's possession, and then there, which is over there, or there are or there is. We could say they're really nice people. We're really using the contraction they are. Or we can say I love their house. Here we're showing possession. And then we could say I need to go there sometime, or there are a lot of problems on this test. Okay, last type of apostrophe, just the general apostrophe rules. Notice in this case, we just have, any noun, in this case, dogs. And we have the apostrophe. Before the apostrophe, we have just the singular word dog. Again, before the apostrophe, we just have the word dog, just one dog. So that means this is one dog showing possession. Whereas this case, before the apostrophe, we have multiple dogs. So in here, we have multiple dogs showing possession. And this is just dogs, like the dogs are barking, okay? So in example one here, we have the building's windows are new. Again, because before the apostrophe, we just have the word building, singular, we're talking about one building's windows. But in this case, because before the apostrophe, we have the word buildings, we're talking about multiple buildings and their windows. Whereas this, there's no possession needed. So just the pages in the book are torn. All right. All right, so that covers all of our agreement. Now you're probably like, finally, last type of English questions. And these are our usage questions. Okay, there are 6 types of usage questions. We have redundancy, arrangement, adding and deleting, the goal of the writer, word choice, and finally transition words. All right, And we're going to have some interaction time here. We're going to try some actual problems with this. All right, so I want you to try number 7 here. Okay, I'm going to give you guys a poll here and let's see what you guys can do. Okay, go ahead and if you don't see the poll for whatever reason, go ahead and just throw in the chat what do you think the answer is, but hopefully you guys see the poll. All right, what do you think the answer should be here? I'll give you guys about 15 more seconds, get your answers in. All right, let's talk about this one. So in this case, I kind of gave you a big hint. This is redundancy. And if you read this, it shows, hey, you want to get rid of redundancy. So anytime that I see like super long answer, super long answer, super long answer, and then this like really teeny tiny answer right here on the answer key, that's a big clue that this might be a redundancy question. Okay, again, anytime that I see super long answer, super long answer, super long answer, teeny tiny answer, okay, when there's a big disparity between them, oftentimes it's showing redundancy. So where's the redundancy in A? A says, at the moment of my extended trip, continuing the trip without it seemed impossible. Now that's grammatically great. The problem is up here, we say one day after landing in Honolulu, Hawaii, for an extended trip. So I've already said that we're on an extended trip. So I shouldn't say that again. So that's why it cannot be A. And then B, at that moment, due to the fact that I was on an extended trip, continuing the trip without it seemed impossible. Now that's a great use of the interrupter comma rule that we talked about. However, it's redundant. We already said that we're on an extended trip, so we don't need to say due to the fact that I was on an extended trip. We already know that. So we've got to get rid of that redundancy. And then C says, during my time in Honolulu, pretty sure we're in Honolulu, it says it right here, but one day after landing in Honolulu. So that's why the correct answer here should be D. Okay. All right, so let's talk about the second type, which is arrangement. Now with arrangement, what we want to really know is you got to look for clues. For example, could I go up to you and just start saying that movie was awesome? You'd be like, wait, what movie are you talking about, right? Because I need to have just said the movie first before I can say that movie. So that's some of those clues that you're going to find where when you look at like how should we arrange these sentences, look for some sort of clue as what would have to come first and then second and then third. Based on, they're going to give you some clue. There's got to be some reason. So go ahead and try this one and let's see what you guys can do. All right, we'll give you guys about 5 or 10 more seconds. Go ahead and get your answers in for this one in the poll. See what you guys got. All right. So let's take a look at this one. So here, a lot of you guys said either A or G. Runner Billy Mills qualified to run this race, but he was a long shot. So I think it does make sense to say in Tokyo, however, Mills became the first to win the Olympic gold. afterwards. That kind of makes sense because, you know, he qualified, but he was a long shot. But the problem is with if we go 1-2, then we would go back to his qualifying entry after he just won the Olympics, which doesn't quite make sense. You know, if we talk about his qualifying run first, then we should probably give the details about the qualifying run. His qualifying entry lagged almost a full minute behind the world record time held by Australian Ron Clark. So there, I think it makes more sense to put 3 second and then have him, you know, in Tokyo, he becomes the first Olympic gold medal. So it does make sense to have Billy Mills qualified first because we have to have him qualifying, and then we need to talk about his qualifying time and then him going to the Olympics. So always just looking for, you know, the proper arrangement. So this one should be G. All right, so let's take a look at this. Here, they're saying, you know, should we, if we were to delete this underlined portion, what would we lose? And you really want to just read every answer choice carefully and think about, okay, does that do what the answer key is showing here? So go ahead and try this one. Let's see what you guys can do. All right, give you guys a couple more seconds, get those answers in. All right. So everybody here said either B or D. So let's talk about those. So D says a detail that reveals the amount of musical talent the narrator's sister had. So does "and my idol," if we took that out, so does the phrase "and my idol," does that tell us how much musical talent the sister had? I don't think so. I think it just says, you know, the sister could be the person's idol for a number of reasons, but it doesn't, you know, the fact that she was a guitar buff might, but not the fact that she's an idol. That just is really like, oh, you know, if she's a person's idol, maybe the narrator wants to be like her, and so that's why we should get B here, because if somebody's your idol, you want to be like that person. So that's why B makes the most sense here. All right, number 4, goal of the writer. In these cases, you just read your question carefully. If you do what the question says, you're gonna get it right every time, okay? So do, you know, really read the question and be like, okay, I need to do what the question's asking. Here they're saying, hey, which choice best specifies the type of song the narrator played on the ukulele? So do what the writer's asking. We wanna best specify the type of song. So which one is the most specific? And if we look at these, our options between music, Hawaiian classics, tropical tunes, and things, hopefully you're seeing that the most specific is going to be the Hawaiian classics. That's more specific than things, more specific than music, and more specific than tropical tunes. Because tropical tunes could be a lot of different places, not just Hawaii. And its classics is more specific than just tunes. So this one should be B. All right, 2 more word choice. These are tough because there's not a rule that I can show you. It's like, oh, if you just do this, you'll get it right every time. You kind of just have to hear it and think about what the author is trying to convey and then best do that. For example, in this case, you know, I began playing music like, and I don't know how to pronounce that. Is the narrator playing music as the locals, like impersonating the locals? Or through the locals? Is he going like through the locals to play it, with the locals, or along the locals? I think the one that makes the most sense is just with the locals. This person played music with the locals. So just always read carefully, kind of really think through, okay, what would make the most logical sense? And then finally, for transition words here, always read a little bit before and after. You know, anytime you have words like this, therefore, however, you know, on the other hand, by contrast, you know, as an example, always just read before and after. Like here, you know, continuing the trip seemed impossible. So we're at a pretty, you know, negative place. But then there's a change. My worries began to dissipate. So worries began to go away. So we need a transition like though here as I walked out of the airport and onto the balmy Hawaiian air. Okay. So that's kind of a summary of all the English stuff. I know we went over that super quickly, and I apologize that we had to do it so quickly, but I wanted to give you guys a real good understanding of all the things on the English. We've got a lot of math to get through, and we've got reading and science to get through. So we're going to keep moving quickly. I know we're not going to give a whole lot of detail in terms of time to do examples of all these, but I do encourage you guys, whether you're going to do it on your own, on that practice test that I gave you, each of you, really working through that. And then also, like I said, we've got a special discount for you guys if you sign up today or tomorrow for our ACT class, which starts not this Sunday, but next Sunday. Let's jump into math. Here are the 6 types of essential geometry questions that you need to know. You need to remember all your area formulas. You need to remember your circumference formula and how to find the perimeter. You need to know a couple basic volume formulas. You need to know how the Pythagorean theorem works, all about angles, and oops, I think that was it. I guess I should have said 5, not 6. My apologies. All right, so what I'd like you to do is just on kind of maybe like the side of your piece of paper, hopefully you're taking good notes, is just tell me, do you know the area formulas for all these? So just take a minute and just write down all 5 formulas. And if you don't know one, just leave it blank. But you definitely want to know area formulas. So take a second and just see which one of these formulas you know and which one you're like, ooh, might want to review that. All right, and then we'll talk about each of these. All right, circle should have pi r squared. Rectangle or a square, you should have base times height. Triangle, remember it's 1/2 base times height. Remember on the triangle, the height is always perpendicular to the base. So this is the base right here. The height is not these slanted lines, it would be perpendicular to that for the height. Same thing with parallelograms, just base times height, but again, the height has to be straight up and down, perpendicular to the base. Now the last one is a trapezoid, and the easiest way to remember the trapezoid formula, since they have 2 different bases, it's really just base times height, where you're just taking the average of these 2 bases. So just take that base plus that base divided by 2, or 1/2 of the sum of those bases is the same thing, okay? Also, not a bad idea to know about surface area. Not on there every time, but sometimes it's on there. Surface area is where you take the area of every face. So you find the area of like the top, find the area of this side, find the area of this side, and we just add all those up. So there's 6 faces on this figure, adding all those up. All right, perimeter and circumference. So definitely want to know that perimeter is the distance around a figure. So if you have all the sides, you just add them all up. And the circumference formula is either 2 pi r or pi times d, where r is the radius and d is the diameter. Again, the radius is from the center to the end, diameter is all the way across on that. All right. All right, let's talk about volume. So if they have a complicated volume one, they're going to give you the equation, but you should know some basic formulas. Like here, for this type of figure. If you have a figure like this, you need to know that the volume formula is big B times the h, where big B is the area of the base. So you'd find the area of this base, you'd have to do like length times width, get the area of this base, and then you'd multiply that times the height, and that would give you the volume of this. Keep in mind, if it was a cylinder, the area of the base would be the area of a circle. Hopefully everybody saw that the area of a circle is pi r squared, and then you multiply that times the height, and that would give you the volume there. So those are some volume formulas that you definitely want to be aware of. But again, if it's something where you had a more complicated figure, they would give you the volume for that. Somebody asked about the perimeter notes. Sure. So the perimeter, you just need to know 2 pi r is the circumference of a circle. And to find the perimeter around something, you just add all the distances around the figure. Okay. 2 pi r for the circumference, though, of a circle. Circumference of a circle is just the distance all the way around. All right. Moving on to Pythagorean theorem. So Pythagorean theorem, this works for right triangles. This is the most commonly used formula on the ACT, okay? This deals with how do the 3 sides of a right triangle relate? And they use this formula, a squared plus b squared equals c squared. Keep in mind that this is for right triangles only, so you gotta have this right angle right here. And then c is always the hypotenuse, which is the longest side. Okay, so if you have 2 of these 3 sides, you can find the third using this formula as long as you keep c as the longest side, the hypotenuse. All right. Angles, lots of things on angles. You need to know that if you have a straight line, that the 2 angles add up to 180 degrees. You should know that the sum of all the angles in a triangle add up to 180. You should know that if you have angles across from one another, those are equal to each other. If you have an X like this, those angles are equal to one another. All the way around a circle is 360 degrees. And then finally, when you have 2 parallel lines and a line that goes through them, that creates equal angles. Like here, F, H, B, and D are all equal. A, C, E, and G are all equal. Okay. And again, there's a lot on this page, so feel free to shoot a quick screenshot if that's something that you need to do so that you have this. But again, it will also be sending out this recording, so you can kind of go back to it as you need. All right. Let's move on to coordinate geometry and basic trig. So there are a handful of things that you need to know on this. You need to know how to find the distance between 2 points, how to find the midpoint between 2 points, the slope, the equation of the line, and then some basic trig. Now, there's always 4 trig questions on every ACT. 2 of them are more basic trig questions like we're going to be talking about today, kind of SOHCAHTOA. 2 of them are going to be more advanced trig things. Now, we're not going to cover everything because there's a bazillion things. People take whole courses just in trigonometry. Okay, so there's so many things it could cover. It could cover law of sines, law of cosines. It could cover trig identities. It could cover graphing, a sine or cosine wave, or a tangent or cotangent wave. So many things that it could cover. So you definitely want to know your basic trig, your SOHCAHTOA. Beyond that, if you do know more than that, like how to graph a sine wave and cosine wave or some trig identities, that's great. It may help you. But for just in general on math, you first, but before you're going and being like, oh, I'm gonna like rock these really hard questions, that a lot of people want to do, like, oh, I'm good with all this earlier stuff. What we actually find is that students that are getting, these great math scores, they typically have holes earlier on that they can improve upon and get better super quickly. So you first want to make sure that those are really solid, those skills on, like, do you remember all your area formulas? And do you remember how to find all, the distance between 2 points and midpoint? All the, do you know all the basics? Once you go through that and you've mastered those, then you can start worrying about some of those more advanced trig or those more advanced algebra type skills. So because those, you don't get kind of as much return on your investment for studying those, because sometimes they're on the test and sometimes they're not. So and just kind of another little aside here on math. If time is an issue for you, that's okay. Most people that get to 50 through 60, whether they guess on them or whether they try 50 through 60, they get about the same number right. Those, math typically starts easy and it gets hard. So if you don't get, you're running out of time and you only get to 54 or something like that, it's probably for most students not the end of the world. Go ahead, always guess on, put something down, but for most students, that's okay. So you want to make sure that you're getting right the questions that you can get right. As a general rule of thumb, you want to skip questions that do 2 things. They take a long amount of time and you have a low probability of getting them correct. Okay. All right. So let's jump into these and talk through how to find these things. All right, so they often ask just, finding the distance between 2 points. How do we do that? And the easiest way to do this is to really use the Pythagorean theorem that we talked about here. Pythagorean theorem is going to help us. Somebody asked, is there a strategy to guessing like choosing only C? That's a great question. Some people say, well, you should choose the same letter and just guess on all those. That's fine. I mean, in theory, it really shouldn't matter whether you randomly fill in bubbles or whether you fill in the same letter every time. There's in theory, it really doesn't matter. And we've analyzed a bazillion different tests and not seen that it really, that there's any rhyme or reason to guessing one letter or another. So just make sure that you don't leave anything blank. Is the big thing. All right, so let's talk about this one. How do we find the distance between these? Now there is this really nasty distance formula, but I don't think it's very easy to memorize and it can be cumbersome. So what I do is when I need to find the distance here between these 2 points, what I'm going to do is I'm going to find what is that distance vertically and then what is that distance horizontally. And what I can do is I can tell, okay, horizontally, that's going to be the difference between these two x coordinates. I go from -5 to +2. That's a difference of 7. Vertically, I go from this 6 to that 10. That's a difference of 4. So then I could do a squared plus b squared equals c squared and figure out what my c, that distance is. So I could go through and I could say, okay, well, 14 squared plus 7 squared, that's going to give me, the correct answer that I need. 16 plus 49 is 65, and then I'd have to take the square root of both sides there. Okay, so that's a little trick for the distance formula to just kind of help yourself out, make it a little bit easier for you. All right, midpoint question. There are 2 types of midpoint questions. The first is just, hey, what's the midpoint between 2 points? The second is, what is the other endpoint if you're given the midpoint and one endpoint? So let's take a look at it. If we have these 2 endpoints and we're saying, hey, what's the midpoint? What we want to do is we just want to say, all right, well, I think of this instead of memorizing the midpoint, I just think the midpoint is just the middle. And when I think of middle, I think of average. So I'm just going to take the x coordinates here and take the average. What's the average of 2 and 8? Well, I'd add those together and divide by 2. 2 plus 8 is 10. 10 divided by 2 is 5. So I know the x coordinate is going to be 5. So I know it can't be in either of those. And then I'll work with the y coordinates. So take the average of those y coordinates. 5 plus 11 divided by 2, 16 divided by 2 is 8. So then my answer here has got to be C. Okay. So that's how we can use the midpoint in an easy way to memorize it. Now you'll often get a question that looks different than that too. So you want to read your questions really carefully because a lot of times on this math, it's not necessarily that the student doesn't know the math. A lot of times they don't read the question carefully or they don't understand the question. And what trips up people is not necessarily the math, but is actually the question there. So, in this case, take a look at 26. You'll notice on 26 that here we give you the center and then we give you one endpoint. So in that case, what you need to do is you need to say, well, if this is my center, how far do I go from here to there? And that would be, well, I went up 3, right? I added 3. So to go to my other endpoint, what I'd have to do is I would have to go down 3. So -1 minus 3 would give me -4. And then I would do the same thing for my y's. In this case, I'm going up 4. And then here, I would have to go down 4. So then 2 minus 4 is going to be -2. All right, so that leaves us with H. Okay, any questions on any of that? Again, feel free to throw that in the chat. All right, moving on. Slope, we should know our slope formula. It's rise over run. It's also y2 minus y1 over x2 minus x1. Sometimes they'll just give you the slope or they'll just give you the 2 points and you have to find the equation, find, hey, what's the slope between them, like this one. These are all actual ACT problems that I'm showing you. Couple notes, they'll make sure that parallel lines, sometimes they'll ask you about those. Those have the same slope. Sometimes they'll ask you about perpendicular lines. They have opposite reciprocal slopes. So like, if one line had a slope of 3/4, the perpendicular line would be -4/3. But make sure you know how to find the slope of things. Also, the equation of a line here, this is an important one, y equals mx plus b, where m represents the slope. Keep in mind that that's only the slope when you solve this for y. So in this example right here, what we need to first do is we need to solve this for y to be able to figure out what our slope is. Then once we've solved that for y and get that in that y equals mx plus b form, we'll know what m the slope is and b the y-intercept. So those are all things that you should be familiar with. And then finally, SOHCAHTOA. This one, here we're looking for the tangent of A. So remember that SOHCAHTOA, that's our little formula. Sine, that just means that the sine is equal to opposite divided by hypotenuse. Cosine is adjacent over hypotenuse, and tangent's opposite over adjacent. So in this particular case, what we're saying is we're looking for the tangent of A. Well, here's angle A right here. So for that angle, what I need to do is tangent. I need opposite over adjacent. So opposite is always across. So that's going to be this 15. And then I need that divided by the adjacent. Now, we already said that this 17 is the hypotenuse because that's our longest side. So really, 8 has to be my adjacent. So this has got to be 15 over 8 here. All right. So definitely want to know how SOHCAHTOA works. Those are, you'll see those questions on every single ACT. Couple other things that you should be familiar with on math that we're not going to have time to cover, but this is just kind of a good checklist for you that you can then kind of go back to and revisit as you need to. Distance equals rate times time, how to find one if you're given the other using that formula. You need to be able to work with percents and ratios. You should know how to like add, subtract, multiply, divide fractions, how basic probability works. Order of operations, remember like, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally, or PEMDAS. You'll see that. Mean, median, mode, remember mean is like our average. Median is the middle number, but keep in mind that this is what they're gonna do. They're gonna put them out of order. So you've got to put them back in order and then find that median, which is the middle one. Mode is the most occurring. How to work with absolute value and inequalities there. Remember with inequalities, anytime you flip or anytime you multiply or divide by a negative number, you flip the sign. All right, I know I went through those ridiculously quickly, but I wanted you to just kind of have time if you need to screenshot that or whatever, be like, ooh, I should work on like how to, work with my fractions again. I totally forgot about that. Or I need to look at, again, order of operations. A couple other things that you should be familiar with: function notation, how to work with rules of exponents, factoring and foiling, combining like terms. Matrices is one that we're going to talk about as well, just super briefly. Matrices are kind of weird because a lot of times schools don't go over them as much, and I'm not sure if Kirkwood talks about them, but they're these things that look like this, and you'll have like numbers in them. And if it's 1 through 20 and it's a matrix question, typically just do what seems like the most logical thing. Like, so if they're like, hey, what is 3 times this matrix? Well, guess what? You would just multiply 3 times each of those things. So it would just look something like this. Okay. Or sometimes they'll be like, what is this matrix plus this matrix? And they'll have 2 matrices like, 1, 2, 3, 4, 0, -1. And this is like 3, -1, 0, 2, 5, 7. So in this case, we're just going to add like corresponding terms. So we just add this plus this. Then we'd add this one with this one. And then we'd add this one here with this one here. So, for matrices, even if you haven't seen them before, and if like an early matrix question, typically you just want to do those kind of what might seem the most intuitive to do. Okay. Another thing to keep in mind is that if again, if you're more of an advanced student with matrices, it would be good to know, and you can look at this on Khan Academy or something, how to multiply matrices and how to find the determinant of a 2x2 matrix. Okay. Definitely see systems of equations. That's when you have 2 equations, 2 variables, and arithmetic and geometric sequences, and fundamental counting principle. Fundamental counting principle is an easy one. That's like if you go to Subway and they're like, hey, you've got 3 types of bread to choose from, you've got 4 types of cheese to choose from, and 7 types of meat. How many different sandwiches can you make? And it's really easy. It's just people don't know it. All you got to do is multiply those together. So it's just 3 times 4 times 7 would be your answer to that. So a lot of stuff there. I know I'm throwing at you. I just want you to kind of have a big picture understanding of what's on this with as many examples as I can give in our shorter amount of time that we have. Yeah, so that's it for math. One last thing though. Does anybody know the capital of Honduras? What if you had a question like this on the ACT? A lot of students, our experience would show us would just be like people would just guess. They would just randomly pick a letter, right? Would that be you? Would you just randomly pick a letter and just move on? Now, not a bad idea. I mean, you got to put something down, right? But I think you want to think carefully about the math. You are given all the answers. So use that fact to your advantage. All right. If you had a question like this and I said, A is Paris, B is London, C is Washington, D.C., and D is Tegucigalpa, I have a feeling that everyone here could get the answer, right? Okay, because you looked at your answers and you used that. So don't forget to do that on this test. This is a great example of one where a lot of people when they do are like, oh, I don't know, I'm just going to guess. But on this one, what you can do is you can use your answers and work backwards and see, this positive integer just means a whole number that's positive. Just plug in. When you plug in 21 here, here, and here, and you add all those up and you can use your calculator, do you get a positive whole number? Well, no, you don't. Well, we need the least possible one. So let's try 27 and then, go on. And it's not until you get to 63, when you plug in 63 for all these, you get a positive whole number. So use the fact that you have the answers anytime that you can, see if you can work backwards. That a lot of times is really helpful. All right, ACT reading, here we go. So you have 35 minutes to answer 40 questions. If any test, it's like, oh man, this is going to be hard as far as time is concerned. It's reading. People really struggle with time on the reading. So I want to talk real briefly about time, if that is an issue for you on the reading. And what I would say is if you can answer 3 passages well, and then maybe on the last passage, you just have a minute or 2 or 5 minutes, not enough time to really read the whole passage, that's okay. What you should do is on that last passage, again, if you just have a minute or 5 left, is you should look at the line questions. There's always going to be a couple of questions where they're going to give you the line. Do those first. Then if you still have time, do any questions that are like, the passage states that, or according to the passage, where it's like directly in there and you just got to find it. Obviously you want to have something down for everything. So make sure you have that within the time. But then just try to get as many of those kind of quick finds as you can. Guess on the rest. You can still, even if you just answer 3 passages really well and get, a handful of those on the last one and maybe get a lucky guess or 2, you can still get a score in the 30s on the ACT reading. So, typically we find if reading time is an issue, that strategy works out for a lot of people. All right. So there's 7 types of questions that you're going to see on this. You're going to see some that just deal right with lines. They're just writing the lines. You always want to get a little context. Read a little before, read a little after to make sure that you really understand the full context on this. For directly in the passage, these questions are going to be just, the passage states that, da 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 da. And you just need it. It's right in the passage. You just need to find that. They will have some inference questions. These are kind of low, or kind of tough, that you got to read between the lines on those. You will have some purpose questions. These are questions about like, why would the reader use this, example, or what's the purpose of this paragraph? So it's more than just what did the paragraph say? It's why is this paragraph in there? You will have main idea questions. Almost every time the first question of every passage is a big idea question. You will have some vocabulary and then a comparison of passage A and passage B. All right, so what are the easiest way to improve your reading score? All right, the first is you want to figure out what is your strategy. So when you think about your strategy, you want to think about, there's lots of different ways. Some people really want to go and they want to say, okay, hey, let's read the whole thing and then answer the questions. Other people are going to say, let's look at the answer or look at the questions and then skim the passage. Other people skim the passage and then go right to the questions. Well, what's the best? And I would just say the best is what really works well for you. What we found in doing this for over 15 years is we have found that for the vast majority of students, what works best is if they take notes on the passage, just underline different things that they think may be important. And then for every major paragraph, they write 1 to 3 words about what that paragraph was about. Now, you're not doing that so that you are really going to use what you underline or use that note. You're doing that to keep you focused because you've already been in there for 2 hours. Just like you've been sitting in the seminar for an hour and 10 minutes, you've been in there for 2 hours, and then now you have to read something that's really probably pretty boring to you. That's going to be tough, and it's going to take a big deal of focus. And so these reading questions are really designed to mess with you. They're going to give you in the answers a little bit of truth, and then they're going to spin it. So they're going to say, like, you're going to read something and be like, oh yeah, I saw that they mentioned blue flowers in the passage. And yeah, they did mention blue flowers in the passage. But maybe they're going to take that answer and they're going to spin it ever so slightly so it's actually not the correct answer. They do that a lot, and you really have to read your answer choices and your question very, very carefully to be able to answer the questions correctly. All right. So read those answer choices really, really carefully and watch out for those kind of partial truths where it's like, oh, yeah, that part's true, but then they're spinning this other part of that answer. Okay. So you read every option really, really carefully. All right. We're going to, just for time's sake, I'm going to move on and we're going to take a look at this one. No, sorry, y'all. All right, we're going to take a look at this one right here. I want you guys to give this one a try. All right, this is a good example. Go ahead and take a moment. I'm going to give you guys a poll. Take a moment, read this, and see what you can answer here. Give about 5 or 10 more seconds. Go ahead and get those answers in the poll, or if you don't see the poll, go ahead and throw it in the chat. All right. All right, so most of you guys heeded my advice, which was great. You read every option and you read it all carefully, okay? But the most commonly chosen answer was H, or the second most commonly. So the correct answer here should be J, slows down, okay? Because they're asking, what does the world seem to do? And it says the world slows down. So moves in slow motion is great for H, right? But notice the second part, as did everything around him. We'll read afterwards. Though everything else moves around, what? Slowly? No, at the same frenetic speed. So everything else is moving along, right? But the world slows down. So, and notice that you got to read a little context. We're afforded the opportunity to reflect in real time rather than in retrospect. So allowing him to reflect in real time. So that's why we got to go with J on this. And you got to look out for those of you who missed, you who said H, which was a lot of you. We got to watch out for those partial truths. Okay, where that, yes, it did move in slow motion, but that wasn't the full answer here. Okay. All right, we're going to move on to science just for our sake of time. Okay, top thing for science. If you don't pay attention to anything else that we're going to talk about in science, here's your top thing. Don't read. And you're like, what? You just told us to read these things in reading really carefully. Yeah, but science is different. Okay. So in science, you're going to have kind of this introductory like information at the beginning. And I'm telling you right now, don't read that. Okay. I want you to go straight to the charts and graphs after you break the question down. All right. So here's kind of the order that you want to do a passage. The first thing that you want to do is you want to start with the question. You want to break that question down into small pieces and find those small pieces on the charts and graphs. Okay. Then from the charts and graphs, look at your answers. Now, 80 to 90% of questions, you'll be able to get the answer just from that. Okay. But what about those other questions? Well, great question. Then what you want to do is you want to read the passage if you need to. Okay. So there will be some times where you have to read, but you're looking for something specific. You're like, okay, the charts and graphs didn't tell me about, this chromosome that I need to find. So you're going to look at the passage for that chromosome. You're going to try to find it. Okay. Then you should be able to answer about 97% of questions. Now, there will be one or two questions where you just have to know something from biology or chemistry or sometimes even physics class. And you're either going to know it or you're not. So if you get a question where you're like, I've broken down the question, I looked at the charts and graphs and looked at the answers, nothing was there. Then I looked in the reading and I just couldn't find anything. It could be that you're at a scientific knowledge type question. And typically though, even on these, you can eliminate at least two options. So always try to eliminate what you can. All right, so let's take a look at how this plays out. So in number 1 here, according to table 1 in trial 5. So what I would do is I would break this down. I'd say, according to table 1, I'd stop and be like, all right, where's table 1? Oh, here's table 1 right here. Okay, in trial 5, where's trial 5? Here's my trials, number 5, so trial number 5. What was the equilibrium concentration of Z? All right, well, here's Z for trial 5, boom, 0.5. So I can get that, right? All right, so use that. Notice I didn't read any of this stuff. I didn't read anything here. This whole passage we can get without reading anything here. Okay, just going right to our charts and graphs from breaking down our question. All right, I want you guys to try number 2 here. Okay, and throw your answer into the poll. All right, I'll give you guys about 5 more seconds, get your answers in, then we're going to talk about this one and try one more. All right. Great job. Okay, so let's take a look at number 2 here. Suppose that trial 7, so I'd stop, break down the question. So I go to trial 7. Here's trial number 7, right? Had been conducted at -5 degrees Celsius. Where's -5? Well, here's my temperature in Celsius. So -5 would be between 6 and 7, right? And notice that temperature is getting bigger as we're going. So it'd be between these two. Based on table 2, well, this is table 2. K would have been closest to what? Well, here's K. Notice that K is going down. It's following the same pattern, with the temperature. As temperature goes up, K goes down. So if I were in between 6 and 7 for temperature, I would be in between these two for the K value. So that's why I should have H. That's the only one that's in between 0.59 and 10.5. All right. So that's how we want to move through this. I want to go, actually, let's do this one. All right. I want you to take a look at this one and see what you guys can do on this. Again, you shouldn't be reading anything on that passage. Just break that question down. I'll give you guys about 10 more seconds. All right. Awesome. You guys did great on this. You guys are awesome. All right, again, we're going to break the question down according to the results of experiment 2. So where does experiment 2 start? It starts right here. So I got to be looking at this table. Now, a couple of you all said something that if you were looking at this table, it would make sense. But we're in experiment 2, so we got to be talking about this table. As Z Marina population density increased. Here's Z Marina population density. It's increasing as we're moving down this chart. Okay, from 0 to 1600. Yeah, see, it's increasing from 0 to 1600 as we move it down. The number of surviving large juvenile C whatever, number of surviving C whatever, what's that doing? It's only increasing. So the correct answer here should be A. All right, we're not going to take a look at this one because I want to spend a little bit of time just going back to why and how to prep. So I would really, like we said at the very beginning, there is a lot at stake for the ACT in terms of getting into colleges and in terms of some really profound college scholarships that people have. We've helped numerous students get even full ride scholarships to college because all they did was they worked really hard improving their ACT. How did they do that? They did lots of practice, okay? They practiced these skills. A lot of these skills, almost all of you guys, you can get these, right? These are things that you can learn and work and get better at, okay? We can improve these things. So whether you're gonna prep on your own, like I said, everybody should have a practice test and that study guide. Start with that. Feel free to get that book at Amazon. It's like 25 bucks. I am gonna send in the chat here a link today and tomorrow. Let me see if I can send this out to everybody. Today and tomorrow, we have a special offer for you guys that if you sign up, it's 40% off our ACT class. It starts not this Sunday, but next. You can use that link that I just put in the chat and sign up for that. That's a great option. Or if you don't remember the link, just go to our website, dartutoring.com, and look for the April class. Or one-on-one tutoring. Whatever you do, I just really encourage you guys to practice and work on this. And I hope that this kind of is like your first stepping stone to be like, okay, this gave me some good insight into some things. I need to take that and I need to keep working on this. Somebody asked a great question. Is the 2019 ACT book still good? Yes, the 2019 ACT book is still good. I recommend the ones from ACT because they're actual ACT tests. A lot of times if you go with like Princeton Review or something, I find mistakes in them or something that's just not quite right. It's still fine. It's still good practice. So I'm not saying like you got to scrap it, but yeah. Just really encourage you guys to try to practice with actual things. I am going to send out, somebody asked about where will the video recording be posted. I have to download the video, or it's got to like do some configuring or something. That takes like a half an hour. And then I got to upload it to YouTube. Then I'll send it out to everybody who registered. So whatever email was you put on the register that you registered with, that's where it'll go. So I know like a couple people things bounced back, so I didn't get that, because if somebody didn't type it in right, or somebody like I think it went to their spam. So just check that out and look at it. If you can't find it, feel free to just contact us through our website, and we should be good to go there. Just let us know, hey, can you send it, and just shoot me a text to like what your email address is, and we'll make sure you got it. That's it. If you got any feedback about this class or the seminar, I would love for you to throw that in the chat. Just any way we can do to improve this would be awesome. Hopefully you guys found this helpful, and take care. I'll stay on if you got any more questions. Feel free to throw those in the chat. But yeah, hope everybody has a great rest of your weekend. Enjoy the long weekend, 4 days. And hopefully we'll be seeing you all soon. All right. Bye, everybody. All right, Harrison, you got a question on anything, my friend?